Well, Janet asked me if I could talk about delusions of parasitosis, and and we have talked about this in this group before, but obviously we have some new faces in this group too. So I guess it never hurts to go over something again, and especially something that I think is challenging to us in extension entomology is delusions of parasitosis, or delusions of infestation, which I'm told is actually a better term for it. It's not working. Oh, there you go.
Dr. Merchant, is that a new term rather than...
Well, the delusions of parasitosis have been called a bunch of different things. It's called Ekbom syndrome. It's called delusions of infestation, delusory parasitosis. You'll hear it in different terms. But
Morgellons the same too?
Morgellons is sort of a synonym for it. I'll talk about Morgellons in a few minutes. But this is what we're talking about as far as what walks in your door. This is a very typical possible delusions sample. And what we're talking about with delusions, and this is, I think, a real important thing to understand this. This is a psychological definition of delusion. It's a false belief. It's not, you could be false about something and just, have an education problem, or not understand something clearly. But this is a false belief that's not consistent with the patient's intelligence, educational level, or cultural background. And this is critical. It cannot be corrected by reasoning. Which means if somebody that walks in your office is delusional, are you going to be able to convince them otherwise? No, probably not. And that's the whole challenge with this. Delusions of infestation is a type of somatic delusion, which means it's a delusion that has to do with your body. It's characterized by fixed belief that one's body or environment is infested with insects, parasites, or other objects in the absence of any evidence. I remember when I started, my very first job out of college was as a pest control technician. One of my very first customers was a woman. I walked in her house and she said, "You can hear the carpenter ants. They're all in the ceiling." And there were, you couldn't hear carpenter ants in the ceiling, but she was convinced that that's what was wrong, and she wanted me to go up in the attic. So how do we recognize delusions of infestation? So this is maybe wrong, but most commonly it's described as an older female. Now here is some data that shows males and females of different ages that have been diagnosed with delusions of infestation. You can see the women are much higher, but males may not complain as much or may not be as likely to seek expert opinion on that. So, take that with a grain of salt. I have talked to people of all ages and both sexes very commonly. High level of anxiety, otherwise rational. People always say, "I'm not crazy." What's crazy? I think we have this opinion of what crazy is, and it's somebody can be perfectly normal in all other aspects of their life and still have a delusion. They usually approach the problem logically and systematically, sometimes very intelligently. The sensations that these people are experiencing often involve something crawling under the skin, or tickling, or sharp bites or stings. It's not always just itching. And this is a tell when it comes to delusions of infestation. They will often describe the pest in great detail, but when you ask them to show you something, they'll tell you it can't be seen. So just something irrational going on there. They can be inconsistent in their description, and again, they say it's too small to see, but they can tell you what the eggs look like. So this is a fixed conviction that they know exactly what's going on. They often get angry and show contempt for physicians and other professionals. I had someone call me on my cell phone this weekend. I had given her my cell phone number to pass on to her physician. She used it to contact me. And as soon as she found out that I was not open to the idea that she had some bug that no one had ever had before in history, and that science might not know about it, She hung up on me, and then she wrote me a nasty note on email. The problem's often preceded by an actual infestation. They'll often say, well, this started about 6 months ago when my dog had fleas. Or I had this foreign visitor that was in our apartment, and that was probably something that started this. The person is often so convincing that they can convince others to share in the delusion. So if somebody says, well, my husband's getting it too, that doesn't rule out the fact that they're delusional. And even if there's no evidence whatsoever, they're going to cling to that belief that they know what's going on. This was a recent Ask the Expert question that I got off of Extension. Actually, this was the woman that told me I was crazy. These bugs that cannot be seen but can be felt on our skin seem to be new plague. You can feel them walking up and down, biting us constantly. I wish someone would figure it out because I'm literally wanting to end it all because of them. Now, I get that occasionally. Somebody will say, I'm at my wit's end, I'm ready to kill myself. And that's why I did pass my personal phone number on to this woman, because I wanted to help in whatever way I could. I've seen all types of health providers. No one's found anything. I take hot showers, wash my hair, clean my clothing, spray the couch down with alcohol. I also keep the temperature really low, and they hate that. See this again. She's starting to get in the minds of her pests. When you take a shower, you start by washing your body before your neck, face, and hair. You feel them running up your body to get to any safer place, and all ending up in your hair. These just are not logical or biologically feasible descriptions. And they often transfer these feelings to pets. I've had people mistreating pets because they think that it's on the pets, so they're going to start scrubbing them with chemicals and things. This used to be called the matchbox sign because people would walk into doctors' offices and entomologists' offices with matchbooks and they'd pull them out. And now I guess we're going to call it the Ziploc sign because that's what people come in with today. But they'll take numerous samples from the floor, bed, skin, wash water. This is problematic when they start bringing a big jar of water that they use to wash down their house, and they want you to look through it for bugs. Vacuum cleaner bags the same way. Again, often very detailed descriptions. You can see they're being very systematic here and devote a lot of time to putting a sample together.
Hey, Mark, quick question. Do you think medical doctors are trained at all in this subject? Because I get folks that come see me were referred to me by a physician.
I think the doctors have a very poor, first of all, they have a very poor understanding of what actually is out there in the insect world that it could possibly cause that. And no, I don't think they're really very well trained in general. And of course, Extension, we have some special challenges. We don't really have training to recognize and deal with mental illness. That's not part of our educational background usually. The issue is very complex because you could have somebody that actually is having these sensations. They could be having illusions of being crawled on by insects, and it's a real physical thing. But there's just a lot of ins and outs to this. The more you get into it, the more you realize it's complicated.
Okay. So how, if you could break it down, and you may not know this percentage-wise, how much of this is mental illness, and how much of it is associated with drug abuse?
That's a great question. The only thing that I can tell you on that is that when the Morgellons thing, a few years ago, Morgellons disease was a big term being bandied around, and there were some Congress people that actually started pressuring, I guess it was CDC, to start doing some research on this because some Congresswoman had a relative that thought they had delusions of infestation, thought they had Morgellons. And so it actually triggered 2 big studies in California, and they sampled hundreds of people that claimed to have delusions of infestation, and a large proportion, I think they said 50% of them were on some kind of illegal drug. And there was another association with solvents, so it could be higher than what I think. everybody I talk to always swears up and down they're not on any drugs or whatever. But
Well, I know that I had one that this was years ago. And they didn't. Not only did they have them on their skin, but if they were carrying their furniture out their window. So I had a pretty good idea that was probably drug related.
Pete,
I think it's not only illegal drugs, it's prescribed drugs, prescription drugs.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times
Yeah.
people don't look at the PDR, physician's desk records to look at side effects.
mm-hmm.
They oftentimes don't pay any attention to that.
Yeah,
I think that's probably a good piece of it. The other thing, Roy Parker does a lot of these cases now, give him immense credit, and he's gotten into, he's figured out some ways to get into what's going on in the background, and it's often found that there's some sort of trauma that's occurred. Anything from a death of a spouse or a child or something of that nature is a complicated piece of it.
see, Roy's not employed by Extension anymore, so he can ask all kinds of politically incorrect things, and I'm not brave enough to go, what kind of stresses do you have in your life right now?
But I think it goes to exactly where you're going with this one, and this is a really complicated piece, and it's got a lot of layers to it.
Yeah.
And there can be real realities, which is really entomology, but then you get this gradient. And talk about physicians. There was a physician who gave a plenary address at what's called Diseases in Nature meeting last year, and he actually focused on this as a physician. He's from South Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and it was interesting to listen because it was very similar to the things that we as entomologists hear about, but a different perspective. And then you get, if anybody goes to a dermatologist, talk to a dermatologist about this. And then I apologize for going on with this, but this is, you and I have wrestled with these things for many times. I talked with physicians and with dermatologists about it, and they kind of shun these things as soon as they realize what they are.
Mhm.
The patients get unhappy, but what you realize is that there's no medical support for these things in terms of insurance. There's no financial gain for physicians to engage in these. When you look at how many hours we spend as entomologists trying to help people through this, and oftentimes we can't, and we don't get paid for this sort of thing. There's a reward system in this that doesn't foster helping people.
Right. This is the thing, I think most of us have stories we can tell. Maybe not you brand new folks, but most of us do have some kind of stories we can tell. This was I did this talk back in 2012, and at that time surveyed those of us in this group, and you can see that. Look, we had 7 out of 19 get these calls 7 to 12 times a year. That was pretty significant. So.
Is it times of year, like the humidity changes or something? That's the
I think we get a few more calls in the winter months, but it's all year round. This
Right after it flooded during Harvey, we had a pretty big uptick, especially right after it happened, and then when people started moving back to their houses. That's when we saw it.
yeah, and that's hard to say if that's illusional or delusional. It could be delusional. There could be a lot more stress in people's lives at that point, or it could be that there's molds and other things that are causing people to itch, and I don't know. This is data from my website, the CityBugs website, and you can see this is the calls over a course of a year, and how it goes up in the summer. But in 2019, I had 1.2 million page views for this site. Of those, the do-it-yourself bedbug fact sheet was the top with 613,000. But diagnosing mysterious bug bites was the second most popular thing on that site, 260,000, and biting mites had 73,000 hits. And this one used to be a lot higher. I don't know what happened last year. But
Actually, I think that one's getting hit on the AgriLife site, because I saw that pop up on that.
it's possible, but in any case, when I go and look at the sections of my site that get the most hits, it's biting insects.
It's probably, a lot of it's the same people, with the mystery bugs going and then looking at the biting.
It could be, yeah, it could be partly. So these are some observations I've made, that because of our time limitations, we can't sit and be a counselor for half a day with somebody on the phone. So we need some kind of professional but efficient response to these calls. Delusional clients are unlikely to seek the right kind of help without some kind of intervention. Now, we can't intervene in people's lives. We might be able to somehow pull a family member or something into the discussion. If you can, that's golden, because that's the most likely way that you're going to get to help somebody. But they're not going to go to a mental health professional on their own. We need good resources that can help the family and supporters to understand the issues. And we need information about delusions of infestation and cryptic insects and mites. I think we also need a better networking system with medical professionals. And so the fellow you're talking about, Danielle, Stephen, you guys in South Texas, glom onto that guy if you can. You know, he would be a good person to refer people to if he's a clinical doctor. So dangers. Now, this is something we don't. You know, we kind of want to laugh, you know, because humor helps us temper the hard things in our jobs sometimes. But this is really dangerous for the people that suffer. It's not just funny. It's stress and obsessive worry. The families get disrupted by this. There's economic stress. People tell me all the time, well, I just threw out all my furniture. They're in my backyard right now. I'm going to burn them. Or my car is no longer habitable, so I'm going to get rid of it. They also will resort frequently to illegal and inappropriate uses of pesticides and other chemicals. Well, I feel better after I wash my whole body in alcohol or kerosene or something like that. So, like I said, one of the things that I try to figure out in my mind when I'm talking to somebody, okay, is this a delusional case? Is this a case of mental illness? Or is there something else going on in this person's life that might be, you know, just driving them crazy because they can't figure it out, and it could be a valid physical sensation. So prescription over-the-counter drugs is definitely one. Illegal drugs, methamphetamine will do this to you, and alcohol too. Environmental irritants, there's a possibility of that, like after the flood, you know, maybe there are some things going on that are just irritating people. Solvent exposures was identified as a confounding factor by the CDC in that one study. Fungal infections of the skin, other medical conditions. High blood pressure will cause paresthesia, which is tingling on the body, and there's cancers and other things. So really, a person needs to get checked out by a doctor. And of course, insects and insecticides. There's a word called formication. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a type of paresthesia or outer sensation in the skin, which there's a sensation of like ants crawling on the skin. So that's actually a symptom that's used by the medical community. I thought whenever I'm talking about delusions of infestation, I think it's worthwhile to go over what real insects, since this is our area of expertise, what could it be if it really was an insect? And this is a picture of a dust mite, by the way. Dust mites don't bite people. They live on dust, and they're not human parasites. A lot of people see these ads in the newspaper and think, oh, that's what I've got. But they're totally benign to people, other than the fact that they cause allergies. Now, the one true human parasite that we have is scabies. Scabies is a little mite. It's microscopic. I don't know if you can physically see that, but if you can, it's on the very verge of human visibility. But it burrows into the skin. This is symptoms of scabies mite. You can see the little trails there. You can see an actual trail here. They cause severe itchiness, especially at night. It can cause rashes between the legs, on hands, feet, elbows, and back. And again, the tunnels can reveal this. Now, this is just shows the areas of the body that are more likely to have scabies. And hands and elbows and feet are the worst places on the body. It's an infection. It's not a pest infestation. So this is a medical problem. It's not a pest control problem. It is highly contagious from person to person. You don't need to spray the premises because it doesn't really infest closets and walkways and hallways and houses and things. It's transmitted person to person. And the treatment has to be given by a doctor. It usually requires 2 to 3 weeks for the cream regimen to work and take care of the problem. Now, we're talking about what do doctors know. I think this is interesting because this is taken out of a medical book, a quote from a medical book. They say, and this explains a lot to me, all patients with an unexplained itch should be suspected of having scabies until the contrary is proven. So if all doctors are following that advice, it makes sense because we get a lot of doctors that send somebody home with scabies cream and say they got scabies. And then they don't have scabies, but that's what the patient's been told. And it's possible to have hypersensitivity to this burrowing. It can happen 6 to 8 weeks after infection, which means you itch all over your body from scabies, not just the places you might be infected. And a doctor that's on top of it will do a skin scraping to confirm the scabies, but they often don't do that. Okay, another mite. It is another true human parasite is Demodex. Now, Demodex is a very strange mite. It lives in the hair shafts and oil glands of people on the skin. But here's the deal. It's pretty much benign to people. It's present in most of us in this room probably have Demodex. So if your eyebrows are itching, maybe that's what it is. Usually we don't have any symptoms from Demodex. They just are part of our ecosystem, our little skin ecosystem. They live at the base of the hair follicles. And it's thought that they might even have a role in defending the skin from pathogenic bacteria. So think of them as your little friends that you carry around, I guess. But it can also cause acne, hair loss, and rosacea, heavy infestations of Demodex. So there are some treatments for it, but luckily it's easily treatable. So that's, again, a doctor's issue. People read about these things and hear about them online, and so I just want you to be aware of them also. And this is real common. People think they have some kind of bot fly or insect that's burrowed into their skin, and there is such a thing, but they're not found in Texas. South Mexico and Central and South America. Someone who's just recently traveled from Central America, a lot of people go to Belize these days. You can pick up bot flies in Belize. These flies are really pretty fascinating, by the way. They lay their eggs on mosquitoes, and then when the mosquito lands on human to bite, the eggs hatch quickly and they drop down to the skin, and then they infest the skin that way. So you get infected via mosquito and not a bot. You know, it's not like one of these things is landing on you and laying its eggs. And this does result in a painful bot or warble that takes a long time to go away. And if you want to see this, just Google bot flies, and there's all kinds of crazy people that are pulling their bot flies out of their skin. Ectoparasites, head lice. So this is if somebody's got something in their hair, it's got to be head lice. There's nothing else really that lives up there. Scabies mites do not infect the scalp, so that's not what's going on if their head is itchy. And these are easy to see. A doctor or nurse should be able to identify those. Now, one of the trickiest things, and the ones that I have to try to deduce carefully when I talk to somebody, is mites. There are some biting mites that are ectoparasites on birds and rodents that do get in the house. They're tiny. They are visible. This is real important. A lot of people don't realize this. You can see these mites. Bird mites would be more common in the spring and the summer when birds are nesting in houses. Rodent mites would be more common during the winter months. I can't see having a bird mite infestation unless you have chickens or something that are in your house. So what these things do is they normally would live in the nests of rodents or birds, and they come out and they feed on the babies and on the rodents when they're in the nest. That's how they make their living. When the rodents die or the birds fly away, then some of the mites are left behind in the nest, and that's when they may go searching for another host and might encounter people and bite. So the two most common species are Nithonissus buccati, the tropical rat mite, and the house mouse mite. And they feed on, primarily their hosts are radius and mus. About a millimeter in diameter. They can be seen on the skin. They can cause red bites on the skin. And usually eliminating the rodent problem will take care of the mite infestation within 1 to 2 weeks. Now this was a video that was sent to me by somebody that had contacted me that actually had mites. And hopefully I can get this to run. This was a great teaching video, by the way. See these little black spots? There's one that's moving along. That one right there. People think they can't see these things. They should be able to see them if they're really a rodent or bird mite. So that I tell people that if they feel something moving on their skin and they cannot see it, if it's so small that you can't see it, you won't feel it. This person probably is not feeling these mites. They're pretty small and light, and they're not touching the skin really hard. So anyway, just FYI, that's what it should look like. And it shouldn't be that hard for them to, for someone to identify that. Bird mites, similar. We have a couple of species of bird mites that are fairly common in homes. They're commonly parasites of poultry, with people starting to have backyard chickens now. And some people actually bring their chickens into their house, believe it or not. But these putting tutus on them. You know, of course, and don't forget people have canaries and other house birds. That can be a source of infestation. Pigeons, starlings, sparrows, all of these things can be sources of these bird mites. And one of the things that people will fixate on is, oh, but the internet says these things will live for a year without a host. And that's, yes, it is true that bird mites can survive for up to 100 days plus without a host, but they're not going to be running around your house for 100 days. They don't have that much energy in their little bodies without a blood meal, so they have to have food in order to get around. Part of the problem is this website, birdmites.org. It's important to know that this site exists and what it's telling people. I had never heard, for 20 years, no one had ever talked to me about bird mites. I asked that. I don't think most people knew they existed. This site came online, and all of a sudden people were calling me and saying, I think I've got bird mites. Well, this is a quote from birdmites.org. They fully support the premise that parasitic bird mites can adapt and survive in a human environment when the original bird host is no longer viable. This is what they're teaching people, is that this is a really bad problem. It's extremely hard to get rid of, and even if you get rid of the birds, you're still going to be plagued by these things. It's the worst thing that could happen to you. And as far as I can tell, there are pest control companies that fund this site. And there are also companies that sell enzymes and things that you can rub on your skin to kill the mites. So I spent a little time last year just going through the literature and trying to dig up all the scientific literature I could find on rodent mite control and the impact of that on mite problems. And I came up with a handful of studies. This is Walter Ebling in 1960. He looked at 5 cases. In these cases, they applied desiccant dust to the attic, and immediately after treatment with dust, the severe infestations ceased in 4 out of 5 of the cases. This is probably the strongest paper, Caffiero et al. In 2018. They had 26 cases of mites in homes that they followed. Bird mites, 20 of those, tropical rat mite, 4, and Ornithonissus bursa in 1. And treatment was successful with pyrethroids in all 26 of those cases. And again, this was an interesting one because this one came from pet mice. And the pest control company initially asked them if they had pets. They said, no, we don't have pets. And then found out later that they had pet mice that were infested in the house. Gerbils, the same thing. Again, all of these cases, treatments usually, the infestations stopped within 7 days after the mites, or the birds or hosts had been eliminated. This is a picture sent in by Monty Vandiver, and this is a Pyomotes mite. This is another mite. This is associated with stored grains. These are actually predatory mites that feed on insects that are infesting the stored grain. And they have a very painful bite. I was bitten by these one time when I was cleaning out a grain bin. Had bites all over my arms that were exposed while I was moving the grain. And these are not fun. So this is another mite, but this is something very specialized. It's going to be associated with stored grains. This is one of the few insects that are arthropods that's been discovered as an urban pest during my career. And it's not common that you get a totally new insect that's discovered, but this one was one. This is Pyomotes herfsi. It was discovered by Alberto Brosi at University of Nebraska back around 2000, 2001. It was one of the about almost 20 years ago now, and they had a pattern of bites that were being reported to health departments by people all over the state, and they did some investigation and found out that there was a mite that had never been described before. It's a mite that normally lives in galls of leaves, and it's feeding on leaf gall insects. And in the fall, these things apparently had a very good year that year, and they were dropping out of trees and landing on people's shoulders, and the bites would be primarily on the neck and shoulders of people that were outside. So that's in the fall, especially if it's somebody that's getting something, then they've been outside, and the bites are mainly located on the head and neck. It's possible it could be this species. Here's the galls that they live inside. And then the other ectoparasites, there really aren't that many, but fleas, bed bugs, chiggers, mosquitoes, cone-nosed bugs, spiders.
What's cone-nosed bugs?
So cone-nosed bug would be Triatoma. It's the insect that transmits Chagas disease. Yeah, yeah. Just another name, kissing bug or cone-nosed bug. And just a word about bed bugs. So bed bugs, of course, have been increasing in importance in the last 20 years. It's a cryptic pest, so it's possible if somebody has bites that they're getting at home, they could be getting bed bug bites. I've talked to people in the pest control industry, and they estimate typically when they get a call for bed bugs, about half the time they say that it's not bed bugs when they get out there. And some of these people are could possibly be delusional. I'm sure not 50% of them are, but they are difficult to diagnose. We now have molecular techniques. You can actually do swabs of the mattress. There's a company in Dallas that will do this. They'll send you a little swab test kit. You just wipe it over the mattress or area if you think you might have had bed bugs, and they will be able to detect bed bug DNA. They also have a test for rodent mites, Pete. And so it's something that might be useful for someone just to convince somebody that they don't have these problems. Now, of course, if someone's had bed bugs 6 months ago, they're still going to turn up positive on those swabs. So it's not a perfect test. Ringworm, I often have people say, well, do I have ringworm maybe? And they think ringworm is an actual worm, but it's not. It's a fungus, not a worm. And it is related to athlete's foot, other fungal infestations and infections, and it would be treated it's a medical condition that would be treated as a fungus. Now, some of the controversies over delusions of infestation, of course, the people with DOP refuse to acknowledge that they've got a psychological problem. They're going to seek other explanations that are more satisfying. And this, a few years back, now it's been about 5 to 8 years ago, Morgellons was a big point of discussion. And a lot of people thought that, and there was actually a lab up in Tulsa, Oklahoma that was writing papers about this and saying that it existed, it was a real thing, which was unfortunate. They were finding these delusional patients were coming into the lab, and they were finding fibers associated with wounds and things on the skin, and they thought that there was some kind of condition that was causing this. They didn't necessarily say it was insects, but it was given serious coverage by ABC's Nightline, so it became a national buzzword for a little while. And you can see, these are some of the things people come into doctors' offices with, and they were claiming that they had Morgellons. So, like I say, there was a congresswoman who pressured CDC, who didn't want to do this research, by the way, because they thought it was bogus, but they convinced the Mayo Clinic and CDC to do some studies. So this one paper came out in 2011, and they looked at 108 people, found no evidence of any kind of skin infection or infestations. CDC looked at 115 people with, quote, unexplained dermopathy who thought they had Morgellons. And solar elastosis, which is an aging of the skin, was thought to be a part of the issue. So as you get older, your skin gets itchier just naturally. And there were fungal and bacterial infections in some of these. And they also found that they did psychological tests on these people as part of the study, and they found that the rate of impairment and disability was similar to that of people with serious mental illness. So there was an association, at least with the symptoms and the responses of people to questionnaires with people that had mental illness. And then again, this was just another study out of the UK that looked at 148 cases. So we can be pretty sure that there's no such thing as Morgellons. It's not an accepted syndrome. Springtails. Now, some people will come in and they will tell you that they think they've got springtails that are infesting them. And of course, springtails are a small insect order, very tiny insects that live in the soil. They jump, which kind of is a point of fright for people when they're looking very carefully for something that could be biting them, and they see these little things that jump. That makes them seem even scarier. But again, they're not interested in human skin. They feed on plant material, and they're often part of those samples that come into our office because almost every house has some springtails in it. This was a paper that came back out in 2004. This Deborah Altschuler is someone, she runs this National Pediculosis Society, which is a organization that's devoted to head lice control, and she's started this study to look in people's skins to see if they might have springtails in the skin. And this is one of their slides that they took from a skin scraping, and they found evidence of springtails in the slide. So I want you to focus in on that area right there. And they said, oh, look, there's a head of a springtail, there's an eye, the mouth parts. And then it turns out that, and see, that's what they saw out of this picture. And they actually used high contrast tools in Photoshop to enhance the picture so that us mortals could see it a little better. They didn't consult any collembola experts for the paper. There have been allergens to springtails documented, but as collembolan specialists point out, the mouth parts of collembola are actually retracted into the head. They can't chew, they can't physically chew on skin, and they can't burrow. The authors actually admitted later that the image was digitally enhanced, and collembola people looked at the scale of the picture that they were claiming to be a springtail, like right there, and said it was half the size of any known collembolan in the world. And so these papers actually refuted that Altschuler article.
They also occur in clouds.
Clouds, yeah. You see the clouds in that thing too? Yeah. So here's the good news about delusions. It's actually treatable if they can get mental health expertise. Antipsychotic drugs are used. They have an 80% success rate, which is not perfect, but it's pretty good. And they usually use very low doses of these. Of course, the secret is getting the person to go agree to drug treatment. If you tell them that there's an antipsychotic drug that will help them, they're not going to go for that usually. They may accept help through a general practitioner or dermatologist. So a dermatologist is actually licensed. They can give these drugs. A lot of people don't realize that, if they're willing to go that route. Generally, they try to avoid the term delusion and refer to something like unexplained dermopathy. So they're trying to get people to just agree to this kind of treatment. So combination therapies of counseling in combination with drug treatments can be helpful. And then taking insect samples seriously is part of the therapy. So this is just a list of some useful reviews. This Lepping and Freudemann have been very helpful. They actually this is like opening a new world for me when I open this paper. It's like they talk about all these drug trials that have been done and everything. There's a lot of research been done on this, but most of us entomologists don't know about it. So I'm trying to be brief here, but just some suggestions. If you're on the phone with somebody that you suspect is delusional, these are the sorts of questions I ask. How long has the problem been going on? And that can be diagnostic too. I mean, bird mites and rodent mites are not going to go on for 3 years in a house. They just don't do that. Do the bites occur in one particular place in the home? If they do, it's possible there could be an animal nest in that area that is producing mites, because mites typically are not going to travel over a whole house from a nesting location. Have you noticed any signs of birds, rodents like mice in the home recently? Do you have pets, including birds and rodents? Has a pest control professional been able to inspect your home and look at the samples? Are other people in the home experiencing bites? But remember, this doesn't disallow delusions if more than one person. Actually, sometimes the whole family can be convinced that there's things biting. Have you seen a doctor? Are you taking any medication that could have side effects? So in terms of what we can do as entomologists, or what pest control company can do, is sticky traps are very useful. I would encourage the use of sticky traps over something like vacuuming and putting things in bags. You want to vary the position of the traps and put them where the people are getting the bites. Tape applied to the skin or visible crawling mites. That's an easy way for someone who's not an entomologist to collect something. Just press a piece of tape, and it's not too bad to look at tape samples. They're a lot better than vacuum cleaner samples. And again, on-site inspection, looking for signs of birds and rodent activity. So your bird and rodent mites are the things that are most likely to be a bona fide pest problem if they're having problems with difficult to see pests. Keep an open mind. I like to tell the story. I had this one sample. A woman brought in a clock. She said, there's little bugs that come in this clock. All you have to do is plug it in. They'll come out of the clock. And I'm thinking, oh, no. And so I actually left it on my file cabinet for a few days. And finally I thought, well, I guess I better do my due diligence. And I plugged it in. And sure enough, rat mites started coming out of the clock. They were attracted to the clock by the heat. And they were taking residence in there, and so it was a real problem. So I use that. I take every sample that comes in seriously. But you do need to set some guidelines as to what kind of samples you're going to accept. I don't accept. I put a limit on the number of bags that I'll accept. I say 5 is the maximum. And I don't really define how many things I can put in one bag, but I'm trying to just put boundaries on this. I also will not accept anything in water or liquid, and I won't accept vacuum cleaner bags. That's just, there's no way that we can look at that. This is...
Sorry, you say nothing in water or liquid, so if they put it in isopropyl, you don't want that?
That would be fine. If it's a small, if they gave me a whole bottle of isopropyl, the only way I can do that is I'd have to run it through a filter, and that takes time, and it's just not worth the effort. And I've never found any mites in samples like that anyway. Don't rush to conclusions. This is self-excoriation. This is somebody picking at their skin. So remember, that stuff does happen. If they have these kind of marks all over their body except for on the middle of their back where they can't reach, that's a little bit of evidence, that they're probably doing this to themselves. I always avoid talking about the pest problem. I'll talk about the suspected infestation or the suspected pest. So I don't want to reinforce their delusion. I try to get a doctor involved. I try to convince them to have the doctor contact me if they possibly can. So if there's no rational arthropod explanation, refer them to a doctor or dermatologist. And sometimes that's all you can do. I also will sometimes give my card or phone number to the person to pass on to their physician and encourage them to say, if you have some questions about this, I'd be glad to consult with you. The dermatologist or physician is going to be the best option for most people. Most people are not going to go to a psychiatrist because of what you tell them. Also, some literature. This is the City Bugs website, and I use this. This is my first piece of fact sheet that I'll pass on to somebody I suspect delusions. I try to get family members involved. The only success, I've had one case in all the years that I felt like was really a success, and it was because I was dealing with the daughter of the woman that was having the problem. And she was really engaged with me and agreed that she thought her mother might be delusional. And I passed on some of the literature about the drugs for treating DOI, and she passed that on to her doctor. The doctor at the nursing home actually adjusted the medication that she was getting, and she got better before she died. She died like a month later from other complications, but at least she did not have that infestation the last month of her life. And get to know physicians. I have one dermatologist in Fort Worth I've never met her, but she must be an angel. She was willing to take patients that can't pay, and she's got a side pro bono clinic, and she'll see them over there, and she understands what's going on with delusions. She's a dermatologist. And I don't try to overuse her, but if somebody's really in a bad place, I will refer them to her.
Mike, can I, concerning insects in the city, that's your maintained site. Is that going to be cataloged?
I don't know. We're still in discussion. Yeah. These can all be translated in other formats, but the information is hopefully going to be good for a while. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks,
Dr.
Steve.
Merchant has offered a nominal fee to maintain it, at least in the interim until maybe we get to those positions. So whether there's negotiations that have to happen.
Yeah. And this is the other fact sheet. This is specifically on biting mites in homes. And I actually have a link to that video on this page so that somebody can see. Yeah. And just some more resources. And I can make this, I didn't print off a PDF copy of this, but I can give you all a PDF or the original copy if anybody wants this for any reason.